are these people?
I just got to pull up all these tabs.
So Prof. Wolff, again, I have not had a chance to go through this one in depth, but every time Prof. Wolff writes about capitalism and when it's coming, and its relation to war, I sit up and take notice. He has been, there's an Aramate. There's Prof. Wolff. Ukraine per se is not the issue. It is tragically a war-ravaged pawn. Sorry. Well, we need to edit that out.
Here, hold on.
In a much larger conflict.
And ready.
I'm gonna let Care Bear do that one.
And ready and action.
The role of capitalism in the war in Ukraine by Professor Richard Wolff. Porn. What? No. Stop. So Ukraine per se is not the issue. It is a tragically war-ravaged pawn in a much larger conflict.
Right.
Slow down and say it properly.
I know, right?
All right.
So this is from Richard Wolff.
This was
right?
in CounterPunch originally. Prof. Wolff. Shout out to Prof. Wolff. He was on Katie Halper this week. I need to go to the boys' room, so somebody else can take this one while I
got it.
Sure, and I'll be back to comment on it in a minute. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Collin.
Sure.
Yes.
To the motive. Okay, good. To the motives for war in human history, capitalism has added another: profit. That motive drove technological advancement and created a genuine world economy. It also built new capitalistic empires such as the Spanish, Dutch, British, French, Belgian, Russian, German, Japanese, and American empires. Each of these countries built its empire by various means, including wars against price systems operating on their own territories, in their colonies, and in foreign spheres of influence. Wars likewise characterized interactions among empires. Global warfare, world wars, accompanied the globalization of capitalism and its profits motive. The war in Ukraine is the latest chapter in the history of capitalism, empire, and war. Capitalism means enterprises run by small groups of people, employers who preside over large groups, hired employees. Employers are driven to maximize profits, the excess of the value added by hired workers over the wages paid to them. Employers are likewise driven to sell outputs at the highest price the market will bear and buy inputs, including workers' time, at the lowest possible market price. Competition among capitalist enterprises pressures all employers to plow profits as much as possible back into the business to help it grow and to gain market share as a means to maximize profits. They each must do so in order to survive because competition's winners tend to destroy and then absorb the losers. The social result of this competition among enterprises is that capitalism as a system is inherently driven to expand quickly. That expansion inside every capitalist nation inevitably overflows its boundaries. Capitalist enterprises seek, find, and develop foreign sources of food, raw materials, workers, and markets. As competition becomes global, competing capitalist enterprises seek help from their nation's governments to expand. Politicians quickly learn that companies in their nations that lose global competition will blame those politicians for insufficient support. Meanwhile, companies that win in a global competition will reward such politicians for their help. The social result of this is that capitalism entails national competition alongside enterprise competition. Wars often punctuate capitalism's national competition. The winners in those competitions thereby often tended to build empires historically.
Yeah.
For example,
go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
Well,
you want to?
Well, I was just saying, like, I mean, this to me is like basic. Like, I mean, every war is over resources, pretty much, right? Like,
right. Oh yeah.
So I mean, this is just like basic world economic history, like right here that he has to explain to people.
Right, but you know what? Like, other than reading this, I wouldn't have necessarily known this or made that connection to this.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't. Like,
right.
I mean, Dr. Wolff is a, college professor, but like, this is kind of stuff that you should be talking about in middle school, high school, to be quite honest. Like, and you wouldn't learn this.
No.
Unless, and even if it's like, I think even in college, you wouldn't necessarily know this in this sense.
Yeah.
Unless if you had someone like Richard Wolff.
to put two and two together. Like, he's talking about, for
Right.
example, in the 17th, 18th centuries, British capitalism, and its global empire. In the 19th century, more wars punctuated the completion and consolidation of that empire. Like, that growth had itself stimulated all manner of challenges and competition, eventuating in more wars. As capitalism took root and grew in Britain's American colony, colonial enterprises eventually encountered obstacles: taxes, limited markets, no representation. These obstacles eventually grew into a conflict between them and their colony's leaders. On one side, Britain's capitalists and King George III. On the other, the War of Independence resulted. Later, British leaders went to war against the United States in 1812 and also considered siding with the enslavers in the South against the capitalist North in the American Civil War. So, 19th century saw countless of efforts by other nations to compete with challenge, undermine, or reduce Britain's empire. Competitive capitalist enterprises engendered competitive colonialism and many wars. The United States and Germany grew into the major national competitors for Britain. Wars punctuated the growth of capitalism across the 19th century, within the United States and Germany as well as elsewhere across the globe. The capitalist enterprises combined, centralized, and grew, resulting from the competition among them. So too did many nations consolidate into fewer numbers of nations. Wars became larger too, culminating in the devastating first of the two world wars.
In the movie JFK, Kevin Costner does this long monologue where he talks about one of the organizing principles of a government and a country is to prepare for war. It's one of the main primary functions that they have, and organizing a military and spending the money on the military and the capital, and basically it's funding the war effort ends up driving half of the economy. Okay, so that's the way they see this, is they're just priming the pump by spending the money on the war effort, because they drop bombs and bombs are disposable, right? And and they need to be replaced at some point. So they figured out very early on they can keep the capitalism moving and they can keep the death cycle moving on top of it. And oh yeah, they're the ones that run away with all the money while that happens. So
he talks about the British Empire,
world wars.
Right, fought the German, World War I, destroyed them, both as contenders for global dominance, right? And then we go right into Germany tried to regain its global dominance a few years later, allied with the newest capital empire, Japan, to undo the results of World War I. It fails. The United States defeated Germany. Well, a particular red country would argue that it wasn't the United States that did that.
Right.
Germany and
How
Japan.
Interesting. Wow, look at that.
To demonstrate its economic and yes.
Dude, Prof. Wolff. Wait a minute.
Right.
Wait a minute. Prof. Wolff. Come on, dude.
He probably gets into
the United States defeated Germany and Japan.
Right.
Ooh.
Japan. I might give you. I might give you Japan. I missed that. I might give you Japan.
Yeah, but even still.
Yes.
Right.
Even that was a fucking atrocity that we caused.
The allied powers. I mean, come on.
Right.
No support, no help, and no love to France or to UK or anyone else that suffered loss. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Wow, okay. So we defeated Germany and Japan
to demonstrate its economic and military.
Right.
This is that particular atrocity I was talking about. Right. Our nuclear superiority. Right. A consolidated global empire of the U.S. prevailed from 1945 until now. And now he's going to get into what's that called again? A new world something like that. The United States then learned what the British had discovered earlier. Building and consolidating a capitalist empire provokes an endless succession of challengers. Among capitalist enterprises, competition losers, employees move to work for the winners. The winners' enterprises grow and the losers decline. Winners' growth often entails still greater profits and more competitive victories. That growth invites and promotes new competitors, fended off for a while. Eventually, one or more new competitors discover how seriously to challenge the older dominant firm and displace it. Capitalist empires and their challengers exhibit parallel histories. As the competitive new enterprise destroys the old, The same happens with empires. That has been capitalism history, and that is what is now being seen in Ukraine. Britain, at the end of the reign of Napoleon. Yeah, go ahead.
Those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it, and that's one of the reasons why we look at this. And he's drawing these parallels. And again, we're all going to school with this guy. He's just brilliant. I love how he presents it. And
it's definitely bringing a lot of parts to it. Yep.
Yeah, I'm not sure
is the problem.
I'm not sure if you hear Indy when I said this earlier, but just the idea that this is stuff that you should be learning in middle school and high school.
Yeah, I heard in high school. I heard you say that.
Yeah,
I was listening.
And it's like this, like, and I had world history, but like I would have necessarily made the connection, like not addressed in this way.
Right.
But I think if I heard it back then, I would have appreciated. Well, I loved world history, but I hated U.S. history.
Yeah.
Like, if I heard it from this standpoint, I probably would have appreciated U.S. history a lot more. From this standpoint versus like, America is great. They freed the slaves and did some other stuff.
Yeah.
How about that they enslaved the people to begin with? But that's another story.
Right. And then how that works and how that there's whole war is predicated on this resource. And I mean, yeah. So
and that's what
they deem as a resource, right? So yeah.
And
after the reign of Napoleon, Britain won a century of global dominance. They ruled the waves. They owned everything. United States after World War did so too. Both empires provoked endless challenges. Nations, large and small, developed enterprises, industries, and political leaders who wanted to make changes or move in directions that differed from challenge the U.S. global capitalist hegemony after World War I. For example, across Latin America, references to manifest destiny resulted in small wars to remove competing challenges in the region. Likewise, Patrice Lumumba, the first democratically elected prime minister of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, showed signs of breaking away from the U.S. empire's control. Both were removed. The one repression attempt by the U.S. that failed was in Cuba. The United States then isolated and economically hobbled Cuba via sanctions and embargoes. Warfare could be economic as well as military. Ukraine is another example, but with a peculiarity. U.S. support for Ukraine is an effort to repress another country that challenges U.S. hegemony, namely Russia. And representing Russia, too, is a peculiar, indirect way to get at the greatest threat to the U.S. capitalist empire, namely China. So
hegemony, a word I did not even understand or know the meaning of until I heard it said by Richard Medhurst.
I think you can also use hegemony.
Richard, for opening my eyes.
Pretty sure, but it works both ways.
Okay.
Like thermometer and thermometer, you can use both of them interchangeably.
Sure. Hegemony. It's not for the kids.
Right. Octopodes. The USSR's survival after 1917, the World War II victories, and its development of nuclear weapons after 1945 created a potential challenger for the U.S. capitalist empire that had to be confronted. Franklin D. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill had accommodated the USSR's control in Eastern Europe after 1945, but that represented a loss for U.S. global dominance. Thus, Eastern Europe quickly became the site of an ideological or Cold War that pitted freedom and democracy against communism and totalitarianism in the USSR and its satellite states. It has to be a Cold War because the consequences of nuclear war would have been extreme. Because World War II, U.S. wars against other communist challengers of its empire had not demonized them as quote-unquote evil communists. During World War II, the United States even allied with the USSR to jointly defeat the immediate challengers, Germany and Japan. But after 1945, that was the preferred ideological terminology used for the USSR to justify protecting the U.S. empire. Then, when the USSR and its hold on Eastern Europe collapsed in 1989-1990, the old terminology faded in favor of a new terminology used to begin a new war on a new challenger, Islamic terrorism. But let's, just for, I'm sure he'll get to it, who was backing those? Right? That in turn was economic decision-making made by two warring powers that were just out of a Cold War we decided to do Desert Storm and the Gulf War and whatever, and we supported the Mujahideen while these other groups gave Kalashnikovs to particular other groups.
Syria?
Right. I think at the time, right? This was
Iraq?
like the Reagan administration now at that point.
Oh, you're talking Reagan. That's the the Iran Contra scandal.
Right. I mean, it's all part and parcel with the same, like we've had multiple wars essentially fighting the quote unquote godless commies and giving the ones that believed in some god some guns to fight them. Right.
So I'll go. The 30 plus years since 1989-90 have changed both the U.S. empire and its challenges. Russia proved too weak to hold on to most of Eastern Europe. The United States reintegrated much of that into Western capitalism via EU and NATO memberships, trade agreements, and Western investments. Slowly, over the last 20 years, Russia overcame some of its post-1989 weaknesses. The meteoric rise of the People's Republic of China brought new challenges for the U.S. empire, including a Russia-China alliance. Russia is now a capitalist economics system allied with the PRC, whose economy has a larger private capitalist sector than at any time since the Chinese Revolution of 1949. Yeah. These two powerful capitalist economies are the largest globally by geography, Russia, and population, China. They represent a major problem for the U.S. global empire. And that is part of what we're talking about here. Russia evidently finally felt strong enough and allied enough with a much larger economic entity so it could hope to challenge and stop further losses in Eastern Europe. Thus, it invaded Crimea, Georgia, and now Ukraine. Again, this is Prof. Wolff's his angle and his analysis of the situation. Yeah. So, in stark contrast, the U.S. empire's ability to suppress challenges to its global dominance shrank. It lost wars in Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq, as well as its intervention in Syria's civil war and destabilizing Libya, he doesn't even mention. Its global economic footprint decreased in relation to that of the PRC. It proved unable to bring nations like Venezuela and Iran to heel despite trying hard for many years. Well, that's because you've been using the stick and not the carrot, the way the Chinese are using the Belt and Road Initiative, and they're not offering to build their country. They're saying comply with us or we're going to destroy your country with economic sanctions. That's why we're losing. So in Ukraine, on one side, is an effort led by nationalists who would bring another nation further back into the U.S.-led global capitalist empire. At least he does acknowledge that they're nationalists, and I do appreciate that. On the other side is Russia and its allies determined to challenge the U.S. empire's growth project in Ukraine and pursue their own competitive agenda for part or all of Ukraine. China stays with Russia because its leaders see the world and history in much the same way. They both share a common competitor in the United States. Yeah, it goes beyond that. It's also the historic, alliance between China and Russia because they were both quote unquote communists who have now adopted some capitalism into their society. But guess what they do? Yeah, they both provide every single one of their citizens health care. Mm-hmm. They're so bad, yet every one of their people can go to a hospital without worrying about going fucking bankrupt.
Well, like America Ukraine, in the 50s at the end of World War II, we were giving GIs education. We were, labor unions were the strongest they ever were, right? To me, Russia's just bounced back from the economic downfall of the USSR, right? To the point where they have stockpiles of tons of resources. They've got, quite a bit of people. I mean, they're a giant landmass. Right, as well as now having good relations with China, having good relations with a lot of other countries, right?
Yep. India, Pakistan, it's really, and again, that's driving our leadership crazy, and the narrative managers in our media are trying to make it seem like Putin is an evil dictator, horrible enemy,
and we're trying to swat them down with sanctions or whatever. So Russia's going, okay, we can also do economic war. We can also play that. So it's going right back into Cold War nonsense.
And every other major world leader is meeting with him and having, sit downs with him I know
Yeah.
Argentina met with him. I know Xi met with him. I know Modi met with him. I know that Imran Khan met with him, and look what happened to Imran Khan. All of a sudden, he got cooed and destabilized out. And was it a coup? There was a question of whether it was or wasn't. It seems by the number of millions of people in the street that it was, unless they were all propagandized into believing that it was. And maybe they were, maybe they weren't. I haven't looked that closely into it, but
Anna Mayer's in our Rockfin chat said that they lived in Estonia right before they were absorbed in the EU. Everyone was outraged and wanted both to do with it. I'll figure out the English on that later. I don't believe the narrative represents the people. Right. And they said who lost wanted nothing. Who lost most in the gross EU expansion? Poland. Look at them now, gentrified to shit. Couldn't agree more.
And neo-Nazi on top of it. Nazi Poland.
So
yes, 100%, Anna. Thanks.
Eventually, some compromise will end the Ukraine war. Both sides will likely declare victory and blame the war on the other among propaganda blizzards. The Russian side will stress demilitarization, denazification, and protection of Russia in eastern Ukraine. The Ukraine side will stress freedom, independence, and national self-determination. Meanwhile, the tragedy goes before Ukraine's suffering. The entire world is caught up in the decline of one capitalist empire and the rise of yet another. Conflicts between the capitalist empires can occur anywhere where differences between them flare up.
It's a proxy war.
Yep, pretty much. Perhaps the greatest tragedy lies in not recognizing the responsibility of the capitalist system with its markets of competing enterprises run/dominated by the minorities we call employers. That system lies at the root of these historic repetitions. The minority employer class controls or is the leadership of the nations that have absorbed and reproduced the competition that capitalism entails. The majority employee class pays most of the cost on both sides in dead, wounded, destroyed properties, refugee lives, and taxes. A different economic system not driven by profit motive offers a deeper solution than any on offer at present. Perhaps the war in Ukraine can awaken an awareness of its capitalist roots and teach people to explore alternative, systemic solutions. If so, this war and the resulting devastation from it could lead to an important turning point that eventually results in some positive outcomes in the future.
I mean,
seriously.
Genius. It's optimistic, but
yeah, that silver lining better have lead in it, is all I'm saying.
Wait a minute. How do you thread the needle while avoiding nuclear war?
Right.
That's what he's trying to do. And he's trying to find a way through it. Oh, I will sign up for that plan.
Sure. I mean, that's what I'm saying is
I think Caitlin Johnstone would sign up for that plan. But the question is, does Joe Biden want to sign up for that plan? Am I so far?
Well, and he's stating that there's going to be a both state solution, and Russia might not go for that. Russia could just go, I'll give it another week. You know,
except that the U.S. is probably not going to allow all of Ukraine to fall in the end. Well, I don't know what they're going to do to stop it or how they can stop it, but they're certainly doing everything they can right now, short of sending troops in.
Right, short of sending. But if they're not sending, if they're not sending troops in and they're not having them join NATO, what are they? Why would they waste all of our? Right now it's just an economic ploy to sell weapons, but
well, no, it's also to economically weaken Russia. And to drain their resources and to distract them from organizing with China further. Correct.
Right. Yep. No, I get it. So, I mean, but anyway.
Look what happened. Look, I've been saying since day one of the things that happened here and the reason for all of this was over a gas pipeline that few people are even talking about. The Nord Stream 2 was about to become operational and certified. Germany was about to certify it. We were desperate to have them not certify it. We couldn't come up with a reason to not. So we started to make up this whole Ukraine nonsense, which was already escalating to a point. And then we started to indicate that false flags were indicating that his buildup was they're going to attack this day, they're going to attack this day, they're going to attack this day. And finally, at some point, when they saw that there was the buildup on the Ukrainian side and what they were still doing to the people in Donbass, that's That's what we're talking about here. So this was another follow-up. Again, you're talking